Hey, this is the fourth episode in a series of videos where I'll be making a portal mod currently titled Frostbite. In the last episode I made an exhibit map. It's been a while since then and I've made the rest of that map, I've made another map, and I've reworked an order map. And I've also been doing a ton of story work from behind the scenes, and I'll be discussing all this today. First, I do want to announce some cuts. So due to major story changes and simply not being happy with it on a visual and gameplay level, the first map is being cut entirely. I'll be developing a new one that works with the updated story, but I'll focus on that next time. Also, I will be cutting the pushing vacuum test I made in the second episode in this series. I ended up just being really unhappy with the puzzle. I know what I said in the video, but I just don't really agree with how I designed it anymore. Plus, it risks placing a cube on a grate through a portal, which doesn't work. Why does a cube phase through grates, you ask? What a dumb question! Because Source is a perfectly designed engine with no flaws. The point is, you could say this map really blows. Anyway, so the point is these two maps are getting cut, and I'll probably be releasing them sometime soon on the workshop, and if people play them and like them, great, Frostbite will be way better than that, and people play them and don't like them, great, Frostbite will be nothing like that. Onto the reworked map. I had already previously shown you this map with the pulling vacuum puzzle. Well, I redesigned it to better fit with the pushbike map before I decided to cut that. I'm not going to waste too much time, but here's how it currently looks, which I feel is a big improvement. However, I am still debating switching the colour scheme for something colder, because it's called Frostbite. And before I begin this episode's main focus, I want to address that in the last episode I gave a sort of timeline of maps that I plan to make, and I want to say that with the latest version of the story, that is no longer accurate either. For the amount of maps, I'm predicting something in the mid-20s, but that's likely to change, so I'm not going to be updating anymore when the quantity of maps change. Originally, I only intended to have 6 maps of the basic story, but then I got a bit carried away with refining the story, and now we're looking at 4 times that many maps. So, it's probably a good idea to make this standalone rather than a workshop release. I've been considering this for a while, and I've decided that I'm going to commit to that now. Now back to the exhibit. In the last episode, I made this area, but I did say that this wouldn't be the actual beginning of the map, so that's where I'll start here. At the start of this map, the player will be in the vac tube, and they will need to land somewhere. I chose to have this opening for the vac tube being a maintenance corridor connected to the actual exhibit. So I made this little room to start in and connected it to a massive fall from a vac tube, similar to how co-op maps often start. The design for this room is partly underground inspired, with its usage of concrete textures and cables. For lighting in this room, I opted for a much darker technique to what I usually do, and I used a large but very transparent sprite on the light to give it a glowing effect. It also gives the room a more dusty feel. I then have the player walk through another very short corridor with more use of darkness and some flashing lights. This area consists of some cavern walls around the room, and I used the lighting to basically make the cavern wall to the side mostly just dark. This keeps the focus on the door at the end and also gives the map a colder, dying feel with all the darkness and damaged lights. Then you go into the next room, which originally I wanted a larger entry for the exhibit. That would have still been under construction at the time everything was destroyed. I was going to have some spotlights and some building supplies, but even in the early version I wasn't a fan of the look, so I scrapped that idea and instead opted for a smaller corridor without the construction elements. It took a while for me to get the right look, but I eventually went for this. A corridor in a similar look to the exhibit from the last episode, and we have some cave-ins at the end that pushed a ceiling light to shine down the entire corridor, with the door we need to reach behind it. There are a few nice little details in this room. We have a little reception area someone could check in had they just arrived, and this out-of-service elevator back here in the dark that people would arrive in when coming to see the exhibit. There are some cubes on display here and you can pick them up, but you can't take them with you as I put a fizzer in the middle. For the next area, I wanted a little spot you could observe the cavern outside before stepping inside the main puzzle area, where the puzzle takes the focus. So I designed this corridor here. In my maps I like featuring alternative paths that have been cut off to make the area feel more believable and bigger. So here I have this caved in path on the left, and on the right is the door to the main area. Now I was able to combine this with the main puzzle to make the full game playable, but now I need the cavern on the outside. So I took some measurements and then went into another new map and designed this cavern, featuring a frozen lake, frozen waterfall, and an opening to the surface which are filled with some trees. But one time when I was looking at this, I noticed something funny about one of the trees. What? Okay, so, to avoid spreading curses, I decided to cut the haunted tree from my map. I also made this little path outside to this other building. Originally I intended that the player would be able to walk it, but that became impractical so I cut that. But you can still see the path from the window. I also made some alterations to the main exhibit, collapsing the back walls to make it darker and less noisy, keeping the focus on the puzzle itself. So that's the current state of this map. Next, I do the map immediately after this one. So firstly, I make another new corridor following similar principles to the others, but in this one the door fails and you have to find another way around. Originally, I wanted the area to the right of this corridor to be a sort of cafe, but I could never get it to look right and I decided to just cut the idea and go for an office instead. And to avoid too much walking simulator, I included a few spots for portaling, although this portal surface on the ceiling is a risky move. I made a flickering light from a monitor face the ceiling, and the ceiling tiles are a very different colour to the portal surface. It should be easy enough to spot, but looking up is the one thing you can count on players not to do. So I'm taking a bit of a gamble with this one. Anyway, you shoot another portal in this area, press some buttons, pull some levers, and you can go through the door now. Just some standard Portal 2 level to say. Next, you're in this area, which currently you can just walk out of immediately, but that won't be the case in the final game. You'll be temporarily stopped here, and there will be a model display of a certain technology, one that was designed by the scientist, and he talks a bit about himself and reveals some information to the player. However, I can't explain this today, as what this technology is would already be established to the player in the new introduction map, which I'll be covering in the next episode. Sorry for being vague about things, but this is not a natural spot for dropping a major addition to the plot. Anyway, the next part of this map is the tram station I've talked about. So for this area, I make a large cavern with a short puzzle to restore power taking place on these island-like areas, for which the pillars are loosely based on pillars seen during the Wheatley tests in Portal 2. This was actually one of the major final pieces to getting this map to look right, as before they were just full concrete pillars, but this look made them feel way more natural and detailed. I did also record a video making the lighting for this map, and will be releasing that as its own video separately. Solving the puzzle opens a vault door between the station and the tunnel leading to the main destination. Once you've restored power, you can take the tram ride. Now in the last episode, I explained this as a direct route to the scientist. However, in the same video I also showed that there will be way more maps after this supposed direct route. So if you put the pieces together, you'd see something was off. And that's because that in the tunnel, a part of the track has collapsed, causing the tram to fall off and crash well before reaching the destination. And I'll cover what happens next in a later episode. Another detail I mentioned last episode was the introduction of a new character. I do regret bringing that up last episode, as the next episode would be much better suited for introducing the character, but I'll give a brief vague explanation here anyway. This character is a core, like Wheatley, and he was constructed specifically for the scientist, and worked with him on his project back when Aperture was still alive, and he continues to serve him all these years later by bringing you to him. Originally, I was going to have the core be introduced in the map I made today, but instead I'll be moving them to earlier in the story, which I'll be discussing in the next episode. So that's what I've been up to with this mod. And if you want to see sneak peeks of what I'm working on with Frostbite before videos are released, or discuss my videos, or ask about help with Hammer, or even volunteer to playtest for Frostbite when I'm running that, then you can join my new Discord. It's been running for a few weeks now, and we've already got nearly 50 members. Now the next episode is going to be very story focused. I'll be discussing the new version of the first map, and many new additions to the plot. Now I've been very vague with story details, this because it just feels wrong to me to ramble about it in these videos rather than let someone experience it. So I've came up with a compromise to keep me happy without withholding information. In this series, I'm only going to be discussing the development of the first act of the game. Everything else I'll keep quiet until release. So in the next episode, I'll give a full, unfiltered rundown of the latest version until the end of the first act. See you then.